And now, friends, on this holy day, let us gather in peace and unity, as one before the grace and grandeur of life, as children before its great and loving mystery. In this hour, may we know anew the holy joy of human lives growing together, so that this hour will imbue all those to come with that same gift. Come, let us worship together.
For our chalice lighting this morning, I would like to share the following thought. What we do for ourselves dies with us. What we do for others and the world remains and is immortal.
And now members of our evergreen chapter of the Covenant of Unitarian Universalist Pagans, also known as our CUPS group, will lead us in a Notes to the Dead ritual. We'll begin with a responsive reading titled Litany for the Dead and the Living, written by Maggie Beaumont. I will read the words for the leader, and if you'll respond aloud in your home with the words for the congregation. As the sacred community of the living, we recognize the many kinds of relationships that continue inside of ourselves with those who are now dead. We acknowledge the many ways in which our experiences of seeing death and being apart continue to affect our lives in the present. Those of the dead with whom we have unfinished business and those of the living who struggle,
we embrace in the caring spirit of community.
Those who are our beloved dead and those of the living whom we love,
we embrace in the caring spirit of community.
Those we feel as our estranged dead and those of the living who feel hurt and separation,
we embrace in the caring spirit of community.
Those we miss with pain and sorrow and those of the living who mourn,
we embrace in the caring spirit of community.
Those for whom we feel some guilt and those of the living who carry regret,
we embrace in the caring spirit of community.
Those who have taught us something of value and those of the living who feel their lives enriched by learning,
we embrace in the caring spirit of community. For it is by embracing you, our dead, that we honor our pasts, just as it is in the caring embrace of one another, you the living, that our deepest bonds of community become real.
Thank you so much, Pauline. And we now turn to Kate Foster, a member of our CUPS group, to lead us in our Notes to the Dead ritual.
Hello, everyone. So if you have a pencil and paper at home, now would be a great time to get them out, unless you've gotten them out already. And once you've gotten your paper and pencils, some music will start, and while it plays, you'll have a few minutes to write a message to someone important to you who is dead. It may be a person or an animal, and doesn't have to be anyone you knew personally. Anyone for whom you have strong feelings or who has influenced your life is okay to write to on this day. And it could be someone who has just died, or it could be someone who has been dead for a long time, anywhere in between. Anyone who's dead, basically. And what you write might be a word or a phrase, or it might be a quick sketch or a tiny drawing, or just a squiggle. It might be that you just kiss the paper, or make a face at it, or any sort of gesture, or whisper something into it. And you know, it doesn't have to be perfect or even finished. Just make enough of a message so that both of you will know what you mean. It's totally up to you, because no one living will ever see what's on your paper except you. Totally confidential. And it doesn't even matter if you don't have anything nice to say to whomever. Many of you might, but if you need to address something that's been bothering you, you can be as open about it as you see fit, even if you end up being downright obnoxious. Any feeling or combination of feelings is okay to express here. It's your message, so you get to say. So you'll have a few minutes to write your note while the music is playing, and then you can do whatever you want with it, basically, so that it will get where it's meant to go. You can burn it, bury it, flush it, throw it in the trash, recycling, compost, or anything you can think of. Do whatever you will with it. It's your message to do as you see fit, and whatever you do, it will go where it's supposed to go. It's all about the intention. So I think I've covered everything now, so I guess it's time for the music.
We bless these messages that we have written, these sacred messages. We bless the words and the thoughts and the emotions behind each and every one of these messages that we now lift up to the ones that have gone before us. Where they go, we cannot know for sure, for that is one of life's greatest mysteries. But we trust that through this ritual, our individual higher powers will help guide those messages to our departed loved ones, our friends, our families, our pets, and even those with whom we did not share a good relationship. We trust that they will receive those messages, those sacred messages. May we find comfort and peace in the knowledge that our messages will be received by their intended recipients, that they will hear those words and emotions that we poured into our notes. May that knowledge of our messages' receipt make our tears sting a little less, and may it ease the ache that we may feel in our hearts. Blessed be, and amen. And please join in a unison reading to close out this ritual. By swift or by slow, these messages go. From living to the dead, their meaning has fled. In smoke or in light, they pass from our sight. By each its own speed, they go as they need. So mote it be. Amen.
As I think back on my feelings about Halloween, I realize that they have evolved over the decades of my life, spanning the feeling that it was a warm community event to a more cynical feeling that it is merely another commercial opportunity for the candy industry. As a child, I remember my costumes, Halloween parties at school, and trick-or-treating with my parents on Halloween night. It must have been as much fun for my parents, since it seemed that everyone we visited invited us in to share with them homemade cookies and a cup of tea or hot chocolate. I guess that's what happens in neighborhoods when everyone knows everyone else. And it helped that my father was the football coach at the local high school and had starred in football at the same high school when he was a teenager and continued his stardom in college. Wasn't Texas, but Friday night football games were the highlights of the year in most towns in West Virginia. And everyone knew and revered the coach, especially when he had a winning season. But when I became a teenager, the whole spirit of Halloween changed from trick-or-treating to just trick, with no effort made to ask for a treat. We teenage boys did increasingly stupid things, like removing stop signs and installing them in unlikely locations, like cemeteries, or in one case, finding a parked car with keys in the ignition and driving it to a new parking place blocks away. On one Halloween, our tricks brought the police to my door the next day to inquire in front of my parents whether I was part of the gang that did one illegal thing or another the night before. I suspect that both the police and my parents could see through my lies, but neither took further action probably believing that a shot across the bow would have the desired effect. But there's one trick that I am especially ashamed of. The two old sisters who were the cooks in our school kitchen lived on the edge of our little town in an old farmhouse with a little outhouse a short distance from their back door. So on Halloween night, we moved the little outhouse into the middle of the road so we could watch the surprise and shock on the face of the next driver as he approached such an unlikely obstacle in the middle of the road. And everyone, including us boys, loved these sisters, especially their cooking. On weekends, when my father gave the keys to the gym to me and my buddies so that we could have a pickup game of basketball, I occasionally stole one of their pies from the cafeteria. So one day they left me a note that read, "Bob, we don't mind your stealing our pies, but could you please return the pie plates?" By the time our children were old enough to go out trick-or-treating, we were so nutrition conscious that we had eliminated most sugar from our diet. So we obtained UNICEF boxes from the church and made our children ask for a donation rather than the sugary treats that were standard fare. In this way, we hoped our children would learn that it is more blessed to give than to receive, while at the same time drive home the dangers of too much sugar in one's diet. But I'm afraid that this may have scarred our children for life. And to this day, they probably have depressing memories of Halloween when they were little kids. It didn't help that most people contributed only pennies or maybe a few nickels or dimes to their UNICEF boxes. I remember our adding a few dollars so they wouldn't be embarrassed returning to the church nearly empty boxes. So the warm feelings I have about Halloween date back to when my parents and I would be greeted so warmly by our neighbors, and the occasion would be used as an opportunity for fellowship over a cup of coffee or hot chocolate. Life seemed so simple then, when we did not think of sugar as a poison, and we could serve trick-or-treaters with homemade goodies.
Good morning. Well, some of you may remember my costume from last year. I was Mary Poppins. And this today, well, as you can see, this costume is a little bit different. Today, I portray Lady Galadriel, a royal elf from the high fantasy world of John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, or J.R.R. Tolkien, the English author of beloved books, The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Tolkien lived from 1892 to 1973. And I'm wondering, and maybe we have a few Middle-earth fans here, so if you allow me to geek out just a moment, Galadriel was the greatest and most powerful of all the elves in Middle-earth by the time we meet her in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which is in the third age of Tolkien's world of 4 ages. Tolkien describes Galadriel as the mightiest and the fairest of all elves that remained in Middle-earth. So maybe that's why this portrayal this year had appeal. Today, in this costume of armor, I am a brunette version. Galadriel is depicted as blonde, but Galadriel thousands of years before Lord of the Rings, when she was the commander of the elven northern armies in the second age of this 4-age world. Galadriel is prominently featured in the television series The Rings of Power, which is a prequel to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's based on writings that were published after Tolkien's death. Season 1 of The Rings of Power is currently streaming, and if you haven't seen it yet, don't worry, I am not including any spoilers. When we meet her in The Lord of the Rings, the more mature, immortal Galadriel is majestic. When we meet her in The Rings of Power, which is her much earlier, we learn she has always been headstrong and unwavering, and we learn she is well skilled in combat, she is fierce, And at times she is reckless, fueled by revenge and deep, deep sorrow after losing her brother Finrod in war. His death was the result of an all-encompassing evil pushed forth over the land by Morgoth and then his lieutenant, Sauron. Upon her brother's death, Galadriel inherits his dagger, might look something like this, takes up his mission, and many, many years later, after the death of Morgoth and the disappearance of Sauron, most believed evil had been vanquished. Galadriel is one of the few outspoken voices that believed it was not. In the fantasy world of Tolkien's, for millennia, the presence of evil remained in some form or fashion, depicted by ugly creatures called orcs and wicked sorcerers and fiery balrogs and even an all-seeing eye. And over millennia, alliances were built and faltered and rebuilt between elves and dwarfs and men and wizards and harfoots and hobbits, among many others, towards the end of destruction and hopelessness. You might say to the end of hell and sin on Middle-earth. Just 17 days ago, I journeyed alongside about 130 other UU religious educators, ministers, and religious professionals to Birmingham and Montgomery, Alabama, where we reaffirmed a commitment to fight one of our greatest sins still present on our earth. As part of the annual fall conference of the UU Liberal Religious Educators Association, known as LREDA, we visited the Equal Justice Initiative's Legacy Museum and National Memorial in Montgomery. The museum educates on racism and anti-Blackness as it has incarnated in our world, specifically in our country, by slavery, lynching, segregation, and mass incarceration. And the National Memorial for Peace and Justice includes monuments to the lynching victims in America. The communities we formed in this overwhelming experience together during the conference engaged in a lot of processing of thoughts and feelings after our visit, including reflecting on how we can continue to support growth in our lives as we create a world guided by love and justice and equity. The theme that directed our time together was living the eighth principle. As a reminder, our eighth principle affirms and promotes journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. Now, I have critiques of Tolkien's work, including the use of reoccurring imagery that darkness is bad and light is good. Reverend Bill shared a bit about the complexities and the great trouble with such metaphor. And I often wonder if we'd prefer to live in aspects of a fantasy world such as Tolkien's, where the evil is centralized, the foe is well identified, and when faced with the complexity of dismantling our real life oppressive systems, would we want more of that clear thing? And I wonder if we crave Tolkien's world where eventually alliances come forth based on a common interest and the common good, built on a common understanding that if harm is being done to any, it is indeed done to all. As Unitarian Universalists, we want to live in a world like that. And as Unitarian Universalists, we are called to be co-creating that world with like-hearted people, with those who've discovered kindness. Now, I want to pass forward a concept and an exercise that was shared at LREDA FallCon by the Reverend Dr. Denise Graves, who is the founder of Peace Ministry. It's based in New Orleans, and its mission is to build relationships that heal and enhance our world. So this is an exercise that you could do standing, or if you're more comfortable seated, you can stay seated. But I would like all of us to place our hands on our hearts and kind of bring in that feeling of heartbeat. As we all do this, we can kind of imagine one another and what that sounds like. Reverend Grace says this sound, this common heartbeat, is the us of us. And now I invite you to take a deep breath. If you're standing, bend your knees just a little bit, shake your hips out. If you're seated, maybe just get more comfortable in your seat and feel yourselves in your whole body. This vessel of which we use to experience our world, our lives. Bring yourself into your body more than you've ever done in your entire life, and imagine there will be people for which your blessed body, your shoulders, are a foundation. The loved ones we've remembered here today, family, friends, dedicated members of our congregation that we ministered alongside, we rest on their shoulders. And children of future generations, they will need the support of ours. No matter our ages, there are future generations, babies yet to be born, who will depend on us, who will rest on our shoulders. So as Pastor Graves asked of us 2 weeks ago, I asked you, are you going to be shoulder ready? Pastor Graves asks, will you get yourself together for us to do what we've got to do to turn the situation around? Are we going to speak for things that are right and not just let bad happen? Because that is what it will take for us to be shoulder ready. So every now and then, and maybe you can just imagine looking into the box of the person next to you if you put yourself into more of a gallery mode, and just sort of look at that other person, think of them as your neighbor and say, shoulder ready, shoulder ready, shoulder ready. And if you are standing, bend your knees just a little bit, or if you're seated, all of us sort of align your body up again. Feel its beauty, square those shoulders, because that is what we need to be shoulder ready. If you're standing, I invite you to get seated and comfortable for a moment again. Now, at the end of our journey through the Legacy Museum, we came to the reflection space. It's grandiose, and while listening to music, the room envelops you with the faces of hundreds of Black and African American people who worked throughout their lives to challenge racial injustice. Rows on top of rows of faces. It is meant to inspire all to reflect on what we can do to make a difference. Now, what I most appreciate from that concept of shoulder ready is that it reminds me it's not helpful. In fact, it is harmful for me as an adult to think the younger generations have it together. They'll turn this upside down world around. Shoulder ready reminds me that I have a responsibility to lay the strongest foundation I can in my life for them. Getting shoulder ready in community reminds us we don't have to do it alone, and that the ministry of bringing forth justice and healing and compassion is joyful and it's life-giving. So as trick-or-treaters come to your door, or as you gaze out at the blazing colors of the fall foliage and breathe the crisp air, or if you're able to come and do trunk or treat and that taco truck with us today as we gather in fellowship and nourishment, we impart this blessing, that we may not be bound by commands, but rather commitments to justice and welcome and fairness and kindness. And as swords have been beaten into plowshares, may the sharpness of daggers remain into soft yet abiding sources of love. May we know deeply that this world contains its own magic, and may that magic, our joy of connection, be steadfast. And may armor be the protection of hope. For we are a people, for when hope seems lost, we cling to it. We cling to it even if its spark is only as small as a chalice flame before us. Hope is never mere, even when it's meager, said the elven king Gil-galad, and adapted here when all else is asleep. Hope is first to awaken, and it is the last to rest. And now for our benediction. If you have come today seeking peace, may comfort wrap you in its embrace. If you have come seeking inspiration, may you leave sustained to address the world's great unrest. Go forth from here trusting in your worth and the value and dignity of all beings of which we are connected in the mystery and wonder of abiding love. Amen and blessed be.